Hello and welcome to this recording on configuration of the Sophos UTM on AWS to use the popular dual multi-factor authentication platform. My aim in making this video is to break down areas of confusion and attempt to simplify the configuration. So, Sophos actually released a KB recently that covers this procedure. But what I'll attempt to do in this video is to go between the lines and start from scratch without any previous assumption of your knowledge. So, just for a quick background information, so Duo Security is a cloud-based access security provider that is increasingly becoming popular. And from times that I've looked at them, they seem to have an approach of simplifying technologies that could otherwise be very complicated. So this is kind of a similar approach to what Sophos has with complete security. So I think both Sophos and Dual Security are a good fit. So of course, most of you already know Sophos is an IT security company that focuses on nothing but complete security for businesses and enterprises. So with that being said, let's get into the configuration. So first thing I'll do is I'll just walk you through an overview. Actually, let's do it this way. Let's bring up the OneNote that I'll be following today, and I'll just walk you through quickly what I'll go through today. I'll start by introducing you to the environment that I'll be using for this demonstration, and then we'll go through this. So I won't actually do a dual sign up. I won't sign up for a dual account, but what I'll do is I'll show you and I'll tell you from my experience how to sign up to this and things to watch out for. Then we'll proceed to install the dual authentication proxy, and you understand what that means when we get to that step. Also, we'll configure the dual authentication proxy, and finally, we'll configure the Sophos UTM to use the dual authentication proxy, and then we'll test that two-factor authentication, accessing facilities on the Sophos UTM using dual two-factor authentication backend server. So, starting with the environment that I'm going to be using today. From the title, you can tell that this is built on AWS. So I have a Sophos UTM running in AWS, and I have a single VPC. So the VPC 192.168.0.0/16. And within that VPC, I've carved out 2/24 subnets. So I have the Sophos UTM subnet, which is 192.168.2.0, and the IP address of the Sophos UTM is 192.168.2.246. Then I have a domain controller, and it's sitting on the 192.168.1.0 subnet, and that's the IP address. And then I have a server, which currently is just a Windows server. There's nothing currently installed on it, and I'll be setting it up as a dual authentication proxy server. And also I'll bring up this diagram, which is straight from the Sophos KB that I talked to you about earlier, which shows the authentication flow when using this. So you can see the Sophos UTM will be communicating with the dual authentication proxy, which will be responsible for the authentication. And the dual authentication proxy will be responsible for authenticating the user, the identity, however you want to put it, with the primary authentication server, which could either be an Active Directory server or a radio server, and then complete the second factor of the authentication based on your configuration with a dual cloud platform, with either to your user's mobile device, that via push or via call, and I'll demonstrate all that for you today to see. So that's the environment that I'm using today, that I'm working with today. Also, I would like to point out that the environment that I'm using, I mentioned I have one domain controller, and then I have one server that I'll be setting up as the dual authentication proxy. One thing I want to mention about this server is that it doesn't have to be a Windows server. It can be a Windows server or it can be a Linux server. The main reason why I'm using a Windows server is because I'm using a Windows domain controller for the primary authentication, for Active Directory authentication. So familiarity just using Windows. But if you're more familiar with Linux, feel free to. There are steps on the Draw website on how to configure that. And I'll show you where you can find that information. Also, I would like to point out there, let me see if there's a way for me to zoom this. Yeah, we can. So let's zoom this out a bit. Okay, so I have two AD user accounts. So I have a user account called Draw Service that will be responsible. You see what that does when we get to that step. That will be the account that allows the Draw authentication proxy to be able to access the domain controller and be able to read user information, or for the Draw authentication proxy to be able to read user information from the domain controller. So that's the account. And I have another account which is called the tester here, and that's the account that I'll be using for testing my two-factor authentication. So first things first, from the beginning, first thing is, before you start with this, having set up your environment, make sure that there are no firewall blocks and all that. First, you have to have a Draw account. Now, Draw has a very good thing in terms of you can get a 30-day trial license. With Sophos UTM also, you can get a trial license if you like to play around with it and get familiar with it. So, and the way to access that is you go to draw.com, which I'll do in a minute here. So let's bring this up, and if I go to draw.com and log into that, and then I can click on login, and now I have to log in. So very first thing I'll say is that if you don't have an account and you want to open a new account, what you want to do is, if you click on Start Trial when you want to sign up, it's advisable to use a corporate account to sign up, otherwise you may run into issues. So that's why I'm using my uni account here. So I'll go ahead and log in here, and it's going to send me a push notification after I select that. So let's go push. And signing up for it, it's really straightforward. And you see here, I have the dual push authentication here. You can see on my phone here. And then I'll just go ahead and click on approve. And now I'm approved. I can sign in now. So one thing I like to do is, let's get rid of this one first, because I'll be setting it up again. Okay. So sign up for a Draw account. If you don't have one, take advantage of the 30-day trial. Then the next thing that I'll do, so I've already signed up for this, is that it's advisable, it's optional, but it's recommended that you synchronize your Draw account with either your Azure Active Directory account or subscription, or your on-prem or hosted in the cloud Active Directory. So the reason for that is you don't want to be managing your credentials multiple times. You want to have a central store, a central place where you manage your identities, your enterprise identities, and then you have that synchronized across all the different platforms. You don't want to be managing multiple identities. But just to simplify this demonstration for me, I won't be going through the process of synchronizing with Azure AD or AD itself. One thing you can do is, if I go on the users here, for example, after opening a Duo account, I can see directory sync here. And that if you don't have any directories, add one now, and it takes you to you can use Azure Active Directory or on-premises Active Directory, and it takes you also to the link on how you can synchronize that. So that is highly recommended. But in this case, I just want to simplify things, so I'll just go ahead and create a manual user. So one thing that I did is that, remember that I already have an Active Directory user that I'll be using for testing called the tester. My user that I'll be creating in Draw, the username must match the username here. So you said the reason why you want to do the synchronization, not a manual one. So I will be creating a user called the tester on my Draw account, and I'll give it this password. So let's go ahead and do that now. So if I go add user, call this the tester and add user. And I can add username aliases if you want. Can give it a real name and give it an email address. The tester, and I can set the status. So I want it to be active and require two-factor authentication, which is the default. Also, if I have groups, I can add the user into groups. So the normal things that you know of. Now, for my two-factor authentication, I want the user to be able to use their phone. So I'll be adding a phone number in here. So it says put in the phone number here. So you have to put in the country code also. So I'll get my phone number and I'll put that in here. So let's go get my phone number. And that's here for me. And let's get rid of that. Let's go and I'll click on add phone. And now I've created the user. The user has a phone. I can select the mobile type, it's a mobile, is a landline, I'll select mobile. The platform is the Android iOS. I'll go ahead and select Android. I'll save the changes. And if I go all the way down, and that's it, I think. So if I go back on the users, I should have my tester user, and if I click on that, you can see the user is active. You can set the phone number of the user and all that, and I can come back at any time to modify this. So that's the user created. So the next thing that I'll do is have what I've just done is step D here. So I'll just move it a step further. And what I'll do now is I'll protect an application with Draw. And what this one is I'm letting Draw know that I'm going to be having an application make calls to you. And I have to register the application, so to speak, with the Duo Cloud platform. So if you go back to the diagram here, so I'm letting the Duo Cloud platform know that I'm going to have this application, which is the Duo Authentication Proxy, that I'll be making calls to it. So that's why I want to be setting up on the platform here. So to do that, if I go back to my Duo account, and let's refresh this, let's make sure that I have my user. Yeah, and what I'll do is I'll go under applications here, and under applications I'll click on protect an application, and clicked on that. You can see this option here for Duo Authentication API, and I'll select the option to protect this application. Now here's the place when we'll start making some notes. So I'll try to maximize this a bit so you can see this clearer. You can see there's three sets of information that we have here. We have an integration key, we have a secret key, and we have an API host name. So I have to make note of this three because I'll need this three information when I'm setting up my Duo Authentication Proxy on-prem in my AWS environment. So that's why I'll make note of them. So everything I've been doing on the Duo Cloud platform here so far. So I'll just make a quick note of this. Let's copy those. And what I'll do is I'll bring up Notepad, and let's make this. So that's my integration key. I'll also copy the secret key, and I'll also copy the API hostname. So I will be using this three information very soon. So what I'll do is I'll go on the font, just make it a bit larger for you to be able to view them. So if I scroll down, I have the option to configure policies. We won't be going into details about this today, so I'll just leave this as the default. And I can change the name if I want, which I'll do. I'll just add radius auth API here. And if I want, I can type in a proper voice greeting. So welcome to whatever organization I want. Welcome to my organization, and I can save changes here. So now I'm done with the side of things. So I've configured my user, I've put in my user's details, and I've also put in my user's phone number. And again, that's not the advisable way to do it. Advisable way is to synchronize with either Azure AD or with AD. I've also configured my application, which is the Radius authentication proxy for Duo. And I've made note of my integration key, the secret key, and the API host name. So let's move on here quickly. So the very next thing that we'll do is we'll go to install the Duo authentication proxy. So this one is relatively straightforward. You can install it on a Windows server, you can install it on a Unix server. And the links that I'm pointing out, including the one for this nice, wonderful Sophos KB here, I'll put a link in the description below. So the Duo proxy server, authentication proxy server, I can install it on Windows or Linux. So there's instructions here on how to install it if I'm using Linux. There's instruction on how to install it if I'm using Windows. So I'm using Windows, so in this case, I'll just go to my Windows server, download the application installer, and just run it. So I already downloaded that. So I'll just go ahead and run that as an administrator. So it's a really, really simple install. And that is it. There's nothing. That's it. It's installed. So it's not configured, but it's installed. So if I go to my program files, I can see Dual Security Authentication Proxy. I can see the log directory where my log files will be saved. By default, I can change that if I want to. I can set the configuration directory where I can find my configuration file, which is the next thing that we'll be looking at now. So let's go back to the instructions that we're following. We've basically just completed this within a few minutes. So let's move on. Now we have to configure the Duo authentication proxy. Now we've installed the application on the Windows server. Now we want to configure it. The thing that I would like to first of all point out here, I'll try to zoom out so we can see the full screen here. The thing that I would like to point out here a bit is there are three main sections that we'll be focusing on. So if I go back to my Duo file, the authentication proxy configuration file, and I edited it with Notepad++. And what I'll also do is there should be a zoom tool here. And let's zoom out. So view, zoom, that is control number minus. So control, and here we go. So this is my Duo authentication proxy configuration file. There are three main sections. There's the main section, there's the client section, and scrolling down, there's the server section. The main section is where you configure things like global configuration settings. So you can always click on this link to read more about that. So those will be things like what will the log directory be? If I want to do syslog integration, this is where I'll configure that. And it's all text file, so it's all .ini file. So I can scroll down here, go under the main section, and I can see some of the options I have. I can define the log directory, the log maximum files, the log file, and all the stuff. I won't be defining any of this today. I'll just leave the default in order to save some time. But it's worth going through the documentation. The next option is the client section. Mainly what we'll be defining here will be our primary authentication servers. So I have two options. I can either use a Radius server or I can use an Active Directory server. In this case, I already set up an Active Directory server domain controller, and I already have my user that I'll be using for testing created. That's what I'll be using. So what I need to do is in the client section of this authentication proxy, I need to configure this Active Directory primary authentication server and let it know. That's what I'll be doing. Now, you can see it here. So to be able to use AD, I put AD client. If I want to use Radius client, I put Radius client, but that's by the site. So I'm using AD client, so I'll leave this. The host name, enter the host name or IP address of your domain controller. Let's go get that information from a diagram. So my domain controller is 192.168.1.161. So let's go configure that. So 192.168.1.161. Username of the account that will read from your Active Directory database. So what's the service account name that will give read permission? So again, this doesn't have to be a domain admin, but actually it's a bad practice to give these privileges that is like real high privileges. So you don't want to be giving all those kind of privileges in your environment. So just a read only account, just a basic user account it's all that's needed in this case. So I can go put in my Dual Service User account that I created earlier, and I can put in the service account password that I also created earlier. So let's go get that password and Dual Service. Now make this as complex as possible. I think the maximum is 128 characters, so make it as complex as possible. Also, if you don't want to, which is also strongly advised, that not to put password in plain text and an INI file on your computer. So Draw has this tool that you can use, and there's information on how to do that. So auth proxy password. So this tool can help to encrypt the password and give you the encrypted form of the password. And so rather than you put in the password here, you put in the encrypted form of the password. And the encrypted form of the password, it's in such a way that it doesn't cut across multiple servers. So if you have maybe multiple dual authentication proxy servers for high availability, you have to run that computation on each server individually. You can just run it on one and copy the same thing over. So it's unique to that computer that you're running it on. So for simplicity's sake, I'll put the password here. But again, I'm just advising you, this is not best practice. This is not good practice. It's a bad practice. Do not do it. So let's move on. The LDAP distinguished name of an AD or OU containing all of the users you wish to permit to log in. So can just put in the root of my domain here. So let me go back to my domain controller and I'll copy this. So if I go to my Dual Service, let me get a distinguished name. And all I just want is I want the root, which is cop.dokd.xyz. And I'll move this to my search directory. So I want you to search the whole directory essentially. So if I want Radius client, I can use it here. So there are other options that we can configure. So again, going back to the documentation file, if I go under the client section and go under AD client, you can see all these options that we can configure. We can configure a security group to say only users in the security group can authenticate. We can configure an LDAP filter. We can configure TLS, which again is strongly advisable, right? Because this is for security. So we can configure all of this. So, but just for simplicity's sake, we'll just deal with the basics. So the other thing that I want to configure is, let's see, is there any other thing left to configure here? I have my host name, my IP address, I have my service account password, I have my search directory. Also, if I want, I can put in a search group to even limit it more, but I won't be doing that for this today. Okay, so that's for the client section. If I want to add multiple, I can just go AD client number 2, as listed here, AD client number 3, then I can have multiple primary authentication servers. In this case, let's move on. There's also this option of using the draw only client. If I don't want to even make any call to a primary authentication server, I just want to use draw only, I can configure this also. Okay, so let's move on to server section. So on the server section, the few main things that I'm concerned about here, and let me bring up the one note here. So a few main things. So one of the main things that I'm concerned about here is I'm concerned about configuring the device or application that will be using this authentication proxy, and then integration with our dual cloud platform. What that means is that in this server section, there are two things I need to let my dual authentication proxy know of the device or applications that I'll be making use of it. So in this case, that is my Sophos UTM. I have to make it aware of my Sophos UTM. So that's one of the things I'll configure in the server section is information about my Sophos UTM. And then the other thing is I also have to make it aware of the dual cloud platform and also the API hostname that is going to be making the calls to. So those are the two things I'll be configuring in this server section, the UTM and the dual cloud platform. So this is where we need the keys that we took earlier. And let's move on here. So let's go back here to our configuration file. And what I'll do is on the I key, you can see here, again, you can see this in the Sophos documentation. It's advisable to just use the radio server auto. If you want to, you can use something else, but at that point, you really should know what you're doing to use that. So you can see that recommendation here. Let's go back to the Sophos UTM and let's go auto. So we recommend using the radius auto mode. So and I'll use that, the radius auto mode. So let's go ahead and put in the information I got earlier. My integration key from the application that I configure on the Sophos, on the dual cloud platform, I put it there. The secret key that I took note of also, I'll copy that and I'll put that in here. So let's put in the secret key and then the API hostname, I'll copy that and I'll put that in here. Then the next option, the radius IP1. So you can configure radius IP1, radius IP2, multiple applications or devices that will be making use of this proxy. So this is my UTM IP. So let's go back to my environment diagram. And the IP address is 192.168.2.246. So that's what I'll be putting in here. 192.168.2.246. A shared secret that you will enter. So I'll get a shared secret here. And this is just a radius shared secret. So it's one that I'll just randomly generate one and I'll use this. So it doesn't have to be anything special. So I'll just make up a secret or generate a random key and put it in there. So I'll need this information in the last part when I'm configuring the Sophos UTM. So you can see this. You can also go to the documentation here in the server section and you can see all the other things that we could configure. So factors, delimiters, we can make it more secure. The one that I also want to point out to you is this fail-safe mode. So there are two options. They're either safe or they're secure. So it's by default it's set to safe. Safe means authentication permitted if primary authentication succeeds. So what that means is that if the dual services are down, if the primary authentication to the domain controller succeeds, allow that authentication. Secure means if the dual service is down or unreachable, all authentication attempts will be rejected. So for me, I think it's a no-brainer for me to use secure here rather than safe, because otherwise that can even be a form of an attack. If an attacker can find a way to deny access or deny my system to be able to reach the dual service, then they can just force it to go to just to domain controller, in which case you lose the whole essence of two-factor authentication. So I'll set this to secure. And what else? So I'll leave the port as 1812 because that's what I'll be using. It's the radio server. So let me just go through this, make sure that I have this configuration right. I have my integration key, I have my secret key, I have my API host name, I have my radius IP of the Sophos UTM, I have the radius secret which I'll configure on the Sophos UTM, and I have my client which is set to radius client. And yeah, oh okay, so this one I need to make a change of this one. So client, this one is currently set to AD client. So oh okay, So mechanism that the authentication proxy should use to perform primary authentication should correspond with the client section elsewhere in the configuration file. So I'm using the AD client. So this has to correspond with whatever we've configured earlier. So if we have AD client, we can select AD client. If we have AD client 2, we can select that. So I'll leave this as it is, and then the port of the radius request. So this looks okay to me right now. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and save this. And then after saving that, let's go to the next step. So we've configured this, and we go to the next step, which is to start the dual authentication proxy service. So we've installed it, we've configured it, now we need to start it. So what I'll do is I'll bring a PowerShell, I'll run it as administrator on my system. And I'll just make this a bit larger. Give it font size 18 should be good enough. And let's go get service dual, and I can say the name there, and you can say the status is stopped. So I'll go ahead and start it. Name my dual auth proxy. And if I get service again, I can see my service is now running. So that's good. So then the next thing that we'll do, according to our document here, is go to configure the Sophos UTM, and then we'll test our two-factor authentication. So let's move really quickly here. So one of the things I want to point out here, main things, is this. There are three main facilities that can be used for this two-factor authentication that I'm configuring here. Number one is the user portal on the UTM. Number two is SSL VPN, which I'm personally a favorite of, because one of the things that happens in multiple environments is this: is you have, and maybe people have environments where they don't even have an on-prem data center, right? They've bought into the cloud, they're hosting things in the cloud. Now you have the Sophos UTM for best practices protecting your digital assets in the cloud, right? And you want your users, maybe who are working remotely, to be able to access services in a secure manner. So you're using something like SSL VPN, but because you're referring to the cloud, you want two-factor authentication here. So the connectivity, and using Sophos UTM, you can have two-factor authentication, SSL VPN working through that, and I'll demonstrate that to you today. So, and then we have the web admin, which also is a good idea for administration to the Sophos UTM itself. So first thing I'll do is I'll set up the dual authentication proxy as a radio server on the UTM, and I'll put the link of the KB, which is the one that I've showed to you. I'll put it in the description below. So let's go ahead on just to the Sophos UTM now. Sophos UTM, where are you? And let's go. Yeah, there we go. Let's log into this. Oh. I may have broken my Chrome client, in which case I may have to, okay, I think it's responding now. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll go on the definitions and users, on the authentication services, on the servers, and I'll go add a new authentication server. So in this case, I'm adding the dual authentication proxy. I'll add it as a radio server. I already have an object created for it, which is 192.168.1.33 here, dual LAN DO-LAN dual proxy IP 192.168.1.33, and that's the IP over there. So let's drag that in here. Port will be the same. Now you remember the shared secret that we configured in the server section. Going back to this, we configured the shared secret in the server section, this one. So this is what I need to configure there on the UTM. So they must have the same shared secret. And always remember that you do not have to put the plain text here. I'm just doing this for simplicity purpose. The recommended best practice is to use the tool that Duo provides to encrypt the password and then put the password in the encrypted format here, right? And then you have to reference it correctly. But again, that's all included in the documentation. So I'll put the shared secret here. And first thing I want to do is I want to test that. So if everything is working, that should succeed and that succeeds. So that's good. That means we're in business there. That's nice. And I can even configure just test with the username and password. So for example, I can go put in the tester here and put in the tester's password and see if that works here. So let's go get the tester's password. And I can select an identifier. So let's say I want to test using the portal, for example. I can go ahead and test, and it will go to the test and come back with certain information. Failed to receive packet from the Radius server, timed out waiting for packet. So this brings up something interesting that I want to point out to you here. So you can see this has failed here. But if I look at my phone, I'm receiving a phone call here, and there's a phone call that's coming from Door, right? Actually, if I go ahead and receive it and you hear it. Welcome to my organization. If you were not expecting this call. So I'll stop that. So this leads me to my very first point of things to watch out for. Number one thing to watch out for is this timeout value. By default, it's set to 3 seconds. You want to extend that, because if you think about what's going on here, you have the authentication to the Active Directory that takes place like within milliseconds. That's really fast, right? Dual authentication proxy contacts Active Directory, verifies the user's credential, how that happened, but then Dual authentication proxy contacts the Dual Cloud platform, which contacts me via my phone as the identity, right? And then tries to complete the multi or the second factor of the authentication. But that takes a while to complete. If my timeout here is 3 seconds, that's more than 3 seconds. So that's already timed out. So what I want to do is I want to extend this. And the recommendation from the Sophos KB that I mentioned to you is to use 120 seconds. So you can see it here. So that's one of the first things to watch out for. Ensure that you increase this timeout value. Ensure that you do that. So if I save that, and if I bring this up again, and if I do a test of that again, so if I do the tester password, let's get the password again, and if I do a test, and what you see is that I'll receive a call again very soon. Wait for it to go. Yeah, and there we are. That's my call from Joe. I accept it. Welcome to my organization. If you were not expecting this call, please hang up. Otherwise, press any key on your phone to log in. So I press any key, and I can see authentication has passed, right? And I'm in business now, so I can go ahead and save that. So that's all working and that's all done. Let's move on. So let's do some proper tests now, and I'll show you things to watch out for. So number one thing that I mentioned, let's bring up a whiteboard now, is watch out for the timeout. Watch out for the Radius server timeout. That is very important. Things to watch. Number one, watch out for the Radius server timeout. Make sure you configure it correctly. Here's number two, and I'll show you, I'll make sure it failed or it fails, and then I'll show you why it failed. So next thing is, let's go ahead and enable user portal on the UTM. So enable user portal, allow it for many networks. I can allow all users, or I'll select number of users. So in this case, I can either allow all users or select a group of users. By default, any user that's authenticated via the dual authentication proxy is in this group called Radius users. So I can use that, and if I click on apply. Now if I go on the advanced to see my user portal, that's using port 443. So let's go ahead and copy, let's go to that, and I'll try to log in as the tester here. And I want you to pay attention to what's going to happen in this case. So again, let's maximize it a bit, the tester, and put in my password, which I have my random password here, and I go ahead and click login. Now watch what will happen. I go ahead and click login. Again, my phone will ring very soon, I expect, for second factor authentication. And there we go, ringing. I accept.
Welcome to my organization. If you were not expecting this call, please hang up. Otherwise, press any key on your phone to log in.
Now look at this. I press a key to log in, any key.
Thank you.
But look at that. It says
Goodbye.
invalid username or password, access denied by policy. And you can carry on, but what's going on? But I have radius users selected under here. What's going on? User portal on the UTM will only authenticate if you allow it to be local. So in this case, what I need to do is I need to go under definitions and users. I need to go under authentication service, and I have to allow this option to create users automatically. So when this option is activated, the system will automatically create user objects whenever an unknown user successfully authenticates to a backend mechanism. So I have to allow this to be able to get my user to log in successfully to the user portal. So if I go ahead and apply that, and it says automatic user creation for which facilities? I want end user portal. So I go ahead and apply that. And with this, now my authentication would work. So what I'll do is I'll refresh this to clear everything, and I'll log in again. And this time, let's see what happens. Again, the call will come in. Second factor authentication, accept the call. This time I'll just press the key. No need to listen to the old prompt. Press the key.
Thank you. Goodbye.
And there we go. Now I'm logged into the user portal using two-factor authentication. So that's all nice and that's fine. So the next thing I want to quickly demonstrate is to use SSL VPN, because that's really, really interesting if you're using the UTM in AWS. Really, really nice, clean solution. So what I'll do is I'll go under remote access, go under SSL. If I go under advanced and just check my settings, make sure that I have all my settings correctly. And then I go to quickly configure SSL VPN. I'll call this SSL 2FA test. And I'll select the users that can authenticate, that can use SSL VPN. So I'll select my radius users group, right? And then the network I want the users to be able to access once they're connected. So I'll select my local LAN and I'll select automatic firewall rules, and I'll go ahead and save that. And that's automatically enabled. So what I'll do is I'll go back to my user portal. I'm already logged in as the tester. And if I refresh this, I can now see a remote access section. So I can go under remote access. I can download the complete SSL VPN installer with the configuration, which I'll go ahead and do now. So I'll go ahead and download that, and I'll go ahead and run that. So run that, agree, and let's get this installed. So what will happen is I will just show you that this is working with two-factor authentication, also using SSL VPN. And then that'll be the end of this recording. So trying to remove previously installed service, installing the adapter, and it's all completed now. So I can click next and I can click on finish. So now I have my SSL VPN. I can right click and go select, and I can select the option to connect. It says enter your username and your password. I put in my username again, the tester, and for my password, I get my password and I put it in. And of course, if I click OK, when I click OK, my call will come in again from the Dual Cloud platform. So you can see here that it's trying to connect, but it's not connected. So you can see connecting to, right? And then if I go ahead and accept that,
Welcome to my organization. If you were not expecting this call,
I'll go ahead and just agree.
otherwise, press any key on your. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, goodbye. Authentication completed in the back end. And there you go. I'm instantly connected. Now I'm instantly connected to my environment in the cloud, right? That's with two-factor authentication. I can try to access my dual authentication proxy server 192.168.1.33 using its private IP address. So if I go 192.168.1.33, connect, and I'm connecting directly using the private IP address. Let's go administrator. Let's get the administrator password of my dual server, and I go OK to that, and I go yeah, and here it is, and you can see I'm connected to it directly via its private IP address, and that's because I have SSL VPN. Once I disconnect SSL VPN, this connection goes away. So if I go disconnect, and that's disconnected, now I can't modify anything. It's already hanged, and very soon it's gonna close up. So that's all done, and that's all configured. So I really hope that this has been very useful to you. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave in the description below, sorry, in the comment area below, and I'll reply to the question. Again, remember the three things to watch out for when configuring the Sophos UTM. Remember to watch out for the radio server timeout. Remember to enable automatic user creation to be able to use user portal. Right. So remember to make note or follow this, and I hope this has been very useful for you. And if there's any particular video you'd like to see about Sophos UTM or Sophos products in the cloud generally, Sophos UTM in AWS, Sophos XG in Azure, let me know. I'll be happy to do that. Or anything, any questions you have in Azure in general, AWS in general, feel free to put down. If I can answer that, I'll go ahead and answer that. Thanks very much, and have a wonderful day, evening, afternoon. Bye.